Bad? Anything else?
That's
a lot. That's a lot. Shukran jazilan. Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein. We're going to go back to our experts. We appreciate your call. God bless you. Okay, now looks like everyone's pointing to our friend David. So, David, you must have more to share.
Yes, I just wanted to add a bit of commentary since the issue of women is being commented on by so many people. The verse on, well, since women are being beaten and so on, and Muslims try to get around this, we know from Ibn Abbas, if you are a Muslim, you have to recognize the authority of Ibn Abbas and his commentary. In Al-Qurtubi, he gives a chain back to Ibn Abbas, which says what the phrase means in Surah 4:34, which says that you banish them to their beds apart. And Ibn Abbas said, to leave them alone in their beds, to leave them alone is to tie them up in their homes just as you would tie your ride. So just as you would tie up an animal, wow, you tie up your woman in your home. And this is even before the beating. And according to Ibn Abbas as well, the beating refers to tying them down and beating them until they obey you. So I've debated this issue, and Muslims have told me that it simply refers to taking a small little stick that Muslims use to clean their teeth and tapping them. We have a reference in Sahih al-Bukhari when a woman was brought to Muhammad, and Aisha said, look at her, her skin is greener than her clothes. This woman was beaten until her skin was green. And Muhammad said to her that since she was unjustly speaking against her husband, since she was doing this, Muhammad sent her away without justice. Aisha said, this is Aisha, the mother of the faithful, and she said that she has not seen any women suffering as much as the believing women, as much as Muslims. This is not me saying this. This is not Sam Shamoun saying this. Exactly. This is Aisha, Muhammad's favorite wife after Khadija, saying that the Muslim women were suffering more than the pagan women.
And let's not forget that Aisha herself had received some abuse from Muhammad, according to Sahih Muslim. Exactly, yeah. She was punched by Muhammad or hit with his fist, and it caused her pain. Yep. So Aisha herself knew about disputes with Muslim women, and she herself was hit by the Prophet Muhammad.
Well, all of this and much more could be said on the topic. It really amazes me because in America, I've heard a statistic that almost 3/4 of the converts to Islam are women. Oh, wow. Are women. And I hope Michelle has heard this and others, and I hope many will call in and ask more questions about the women issue, the authority of the Quran, science in Islam and the Quran. And you know where to call right here, ABN 248-416-1300. We have a lot more to say, but we'd also like to hear from you. I believe Brother Sam has something more to add.
I do want to get to the other myths because there's a lot to cover, but since the caller mentioned Muhammad marrying his daughter-in-law, I think it's important that we briefly touch on the implications of that, that event in Muhammad's life. The Muslims who read the Quran, I invite you to turn to chapter 33, verse 37, and then you need to read the commentators concerning the meaning of that passage, because the passage is vague. It mentions that Muhammad told someone named Zayd to keep your wife. And then the passage rebukes Muhammad for trying to conceal in his heart what Allah was about to make known. And according to the explanation of the passage, Muhammad had adopted a son named Zayd. And after adopting him, people started calling him Zayd ibn Muhammad. And then Muhammad insisted that Muhammad's cousin, Zainab bin Jahsh, marry him. Now, according to the tradition, Muhammad one time went to visit Zayd, and Zayd wasn't home, and he saw Zainab unveiled and somewhat exposed. I mean, when I say exposed, not nude, but somewhat more exposed than normal. And according to the commentators, Muhammad said, praise be to God who changes the heart. And there Zainab realized that Muhammad had affections for her. She told her husband. He went back and told Muhammad, I'll divorce her for you. And Muhammad said, no, keep your wife. But then the verse came down saying, no, this is something from Allah. When Zayd divorces her, you marry her. And then the passage says that the reason why Allah had Muhammad do this was to set precedence, set the example for others to marry the divorcees of their adopted sons. So this was supposedly the example. Muhammad did it as an example that you who have adopted children, you too can marry the divorced wives of your adopted sons. However, here's the problem. Here's the problem. Shortly after that, when Muhammad got fed up with people saying that he married his son's wife, because Zayd was considered his son, he adopted him, and he was called Zayd, son of Muhammad. Shortly after that, verses came down. You can find it in chapter 33 of the Quran, verses 4 and 5, and verse 40. Chapter 33, verses 4 and 5, and verse 40. It says that from this moment on, there's no more adoption in Islam, and Muhammad is a father to no one. Now here's the problem. I thought that Muhammad's marriage to his adopted son's divorcee was to set the precedence for others to do likewise. However, shortly after that, Muhammad abolished adoption. So what example did his marriage with Zainab set when Allah knew he was going to abolish adoption? It seems quite obvious to me that Muhammad had to find an excuse to marry the divorced wife of his adopted son because he was attracted to her. But in doing that, he destroyed adoption and robbed many children and couples from having the joy of adopting children and having a family. He robbed them of that blessing. And according to the scriptures, the true God of the Bible adopts us into his family as children. And yet Muhammad and the deity he proclaimed hates adoption. So I think the implications of that story are quite obvious.
Well, I think Brother David has something to say. Before we go to him, I want to remind you that this is a call-in show. It's live, and we welcome your calls. We assume that all of you Muslims out there agree with what we're saying, and that's why you're not calling. So thank you very much. Brother David.
So I just wanted to add a brief comment from my personal experience of how the Quran can affect Muslims. In one of my public debates with a man named Osama Abdullah, he criticized Christians because we would adopt people. He said, how can you invite another person into your home with your wife? How could you ever do this? He said, how could you bring another child into your home, someone who is not your child, and treat this person like he's your child? And he asked me, could you do this? And I said, God, I have nothing in me that would compel God to adopt me into his family, and yet he has.
Hallelujah.
And Christians have
Praise
this
God.
same sort of love. And I said, of course I could. If I could adopt a child, if we had the money, I would adopt as many children as I could, and I would treat them as my own, because this is how God has treated us. And it's just amazing that Muslims look down upon this practice which Muhammad once did. Muhammad once adopted someone. He once had the same views as us. But because he lusted after the wife of his own adopted son, he abolished the practice of adoption.
This is very significant because we find in Islam this idea that we do whatever, we have a wonderful exemplar in the Prophet Muhammad, and we should follow him not just in the religious, spiritual aspects, but in the very way we put our clothes on and take them off at the end of the day and all of these things. But the omissions of the following of this example is a very peculiar and suspicious, like adoption. And then what about the number of wives one can have? Did Muhammad limit himself to 4 wives? Well, then why did he limit everyone else to 4 wives? Very interesting. And when we talk about Muhammad and the Quran, and especially the Hadith, bring into question the integrity of this supposed prophet of God, if we find that that there is a problem with Muhammad's integrity as the mouthpiece of God, does it not, brothers, throw into in suspense and to danger the entire teaching of Islam? Because all of Islam came through the mouth of just one man, Muhammad. Whereas we have the Bible that was written over 1,500 years by 40 different men as the Holy Spirit moved them, and you have amazing unity. And then in the Quran, over 23 years, you have one man. We have such disunity. We have so many problems. We have so many problems with the character of this man. And so now we find that if there is a problem with Muhammad and his integrity, then everything that comes, not just the Quran, but the Hadith and Sharia and all of Islam, is it not completely thrown into question by the integrity of this man?